Have you ever heard a piece of music that feels less like a song and more like a secret? A secret whispered across time, filled with so much beauty and pain that it seems impossible for it to have come from just one person. It's a voice that sounds like it understands everything you've ever felt, every quiet triumph, and every devastating loss. For most of the world, that voice belonged to a ghost, a phantom of the famed Laurel Canyon music scene of the 1970s, a footnote in a story dominated by names like Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, and the Eagles. But for those who knew, for those who stumbled upon her records in dusty bins or heard her name spoken in hushed, reverent tones by other musicians, that voice belonged to Judee Sill. Today, we're not just telling the story of a forgotten singer. We are embarking on an excavation. We're digging through layers of tragedy, myth, and misunderstanding to uncover the staggering, contradictory, and heartbreaking genius of a woman who was, in every sense of the word, a lost angel. This is the story of Judee Sill, an artist whose brilliance was matched only by her capacity for self-destruction, and whose music is one of the most sublime and tragic what-ifs in history. To understand Judee, you have to understand the world that forged her and the world she fought against. She was born in 1944 into an America still blinking in the bright, uncertain light of a post-war world. Her early childhood unfolded in Oakland, California, a place humming with the promise of the American dream. Her father, Milford Sill, was a cameraman at Paramount Studios, a man who literally captured dreams for a living. Her mother, Oneta, was a talented pianist. On the surface, it was a home filled with creativity and potential, but this idyllic post-war veneer was paper thin. It was an era of profound social conformity, a time when anything that deviated from the clean televised image of the perfect family was pushed into the shadows. Beneath the surface of this prosperous, optimistic society, a silent rebellion was brewing. It was the world of the beats, of nascent counterculture, a quiet rejection of the sanitized reality being sold to the masses. This was the tension Judee grew up in, a world demanding perfection while she felt, perhaps from the very beginning, an inherent brokenness within herself. The first crack in her world was a cataclysm. When Judee was just 8 years old, her father died of pneumonia. The man who represented the magic of Hollywood, the stability of her young life, was suddenly gone. Her mother, struggling to cope, soon remarried a man named Ken Muse, a brilliant but volatile animator who had worked on Disney classics like Snow White and later for Hanna-Barbera. This is where Judee's story veers sharply from the suburban dream into a gothic nightmare. Muse was an alcoholic and, by all accounts, a deeply cruel and abusive stepfather. The home, once a place of creativity, became a battleground of drunken rages and terrifying violence. Judee and her brother Dennis bore the brunt of it. This wasn't just dysfunction. It was a daily education in trauma, a foundational experience that taught her the world was unsafe, and that the people meant to protect you could be the source of your deepest pain. It's no wonder, then, that she began to look for an escape. And in the tightly laced world of the 1950s, escape meant rebellion. Judee's teenage years were not a gentle slide into counterculture. They were a full-blown declaration of war on the world that had hurt her. She wasn't just skipping school, she was becoming a prodigious hellraiser. She fell in with a rough crowd, discovering Benzedrine and the thrill of defying every rule laid before her. Her rebellion escalated from truancy to crime. She and a friend began committing robberies, not with brute force, but with a strange, almost theatrical flair. They'd knock over liquor stores and gas stations, a desperate, reckless grab for freedom and control in a life where she had none. Inevitably, she was caught. At 16, she was sent to the Hollydale School for Girls, a reform school in Los Angeles. This was a place meant to correct and discipline, but for a spirit as fierce and wounded as Judee's, it was more like a crucible. It was here, surrounded by other lost and broken girls, that two fundamental parts of her identity began to crystallize. First, her musical gift. She became the chapel organist, finding a strange solace and a powerful outlet in the sacred music of Bach. The complex counterpoint, the soaring spiritual grandeur. It spoke to a part of her that the chaos couldn't touch. She began to write her own songs, channeling her pain into melody and verse. When she was released, she didn't walk the straight and narrow. She enrolled in Los Angeles Valley College to study music, but her old life pulled her back in. She met and married a fellow student named Bob Harris. Together, they weren't just a couple. They were a team of criminal artists. They used their artistic skills to forge checks, and in a detail that feels torn from a pulp novel, they reportedly even used puppets in their car as a cover for their crimes. But their most dangerous pursuit was heroin. The drug offered a complete numbing escape, and it took hold of them both with terrifying speed. To support their addiction, their crimes grew bolder, culminating in a string of armed robberies. Once again, the law caught up with her. Judee was arrested and sent to jail, and it was there, in the stark, unforgiving environment of a prison cell, that she made a decision that would change the course of her life. She quit heroin. Cold turkey. She later said she spent her time in jail studying Christian Science and occultist texts from figures like Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, a desperate intellectual search for a framework to understand her suffering and find a path to redemption. When she was released, she was determined to leave the criminal life behind. The only thing she wanted to pursue was her music. Emerging from prison in the late 1960s, Judee stepped into the epicenter of a cultural revolution. Laurel Canyon, Los Angeles, was less a place and more a mythical state of being. It was a wooded bohemian enclave where the air was thick with the scent of eucalyptus and marijuana, and the nights were filled with the sound of acoustic guitars drifting from bungalow porches. This was the home of Joni Mitchell, Frank Zappa, the Mamas and the Papas, and a constellation of other stars who were rewriting the rules of popular music. Judee, with her dark past and her fiercely original talent, was both a perfect fit and a complete anomaly. She started playing in small clubs, and her reputation began to build. Her music wasn't the straightforward folk or blues rock that dominated the scene. It was something else entirely. It was a complex tapestry of American folk, Baroque classical structures, gospel soul, and Pythagorean mysticism. Her songs had chord progressions that baffled other musicians and lyrics that spoke of saints, sinners, cowboys, and cosmic love. Her big break came through a series of fateful connections. She befriended members of the band The Turtles who were impressed by her songwriting. Through them, she was introduced to the reigning royalty of the Canyon, Graham Nash and David Crosby. They were immediately floored by her talent. Crosby, in particular, was an early champion. It was through this connection that her demo tape landed in the hands of the most ambitious and powerful new player in town, David Geffen. Geffen was in the process of launching his own record label, Asylum Records, a name that was meant to signify a haven for artists who didn't fit the corporate mold. He heard Judee's demo and was captivated. He saw the raw, untamable genius. In a move that would become legendary, David Geffen made Judee Sill the very first artist signed to Asylum Records. For a woman who had been in reform school and prison, who had fought her way back from heroin addiction, this was more than a record deal. It was a miracle. It was validation. It felt like the beginning of a beautiful, redemptive story. Her 1971 debut album, simply titled Judee Sill, was a masterpiece right out of the gate. It was produced by Henry Louis, who had famously worked with Joni Mitchell, and featured lush, gorgeous arrangements from Judee herself, who meticulously orchestrated every note. The album is a journey into her singular universe. There's the haunting Lopian along through the cosmos, a song that feels both playful and profoundly spiritual. There's the heartbreaking, the archetypal man, a portrait of a flawed but beloved figure. And then there was Jesus Was a Crossmaker. This became her most famous song, eventually covered by the Hollies and later Warren Zevon. For years, audiences assumed it was a straightforward religious song, but the truth was far more personal and painful. Judee later revealed the song was not about the Son of God, but about the songwriter Judee Sill, with whom she'd had a brief, intense, and ultimately heartbreaking affair. She had poured all her feelings of betrayal and abandonment into this stunning piece of musical alchemy, transforming a personal heartbreak into a universal anthem of pain and forgiveness. She called him a crossmaker because he had crucified her heart. It's a perfect example of how Judee operated, weaving her raw personal wounds into transcendent art. The critics were ecstatic. Rolling Stone and other publications praised her as a major new talent, comparing her to the likes of Laura Nyro, but acknowledging that her style was utterly her own. She toured with Crosby and Nash, opening for them in huge venues. Her intricate, delicate songs often a stark contrast to the stadium rock atmosphere. But a strange thing happened, or rather, a strange thing didn't happen. The album didn't sell. It was a critical triumph, but a commercial dud. Perhaps it was too complex for mainstream radio, too spiritually intense, too emotionally raw, or perhaps the industry just didn't know how to market a genius who refused to be put in a box. Undeterred, or at least outwardly so, Judee poured everything she had into her second album, 1973's Heart Food. If her debut was an introduction, Heart Food was a full-blown sermon from the Book of Sill. This time, she took even more control, producing and arranging most of the album herself. The result was even more ambitious, more complex, and more explicitly spiritual. The Christian imagery that had been a subtle undercurrent on her debut was now front and center. The album opens with There's a Rugged Road, a gospel-infused anthem of perseverance. But the centerpiece, the song that represents the absolute zenith of her artistry, is The Kiss. It's a 7.5-minute epic of breathtaking beauty. The lyrics describe a mystical, transformative union with the divine, a holy place of grace. The melody soars and swoops with the elegance of a Bach cantata, the harmonies building to a climax of pure, ecstatic release. To listen to The Kiss is to feel for a moment that you have touched something sacred. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most beautiful songs ever recorded. And yet, the darkness was never far away. For all her spiritual yearning, Judee was still at war with herself and the world. She was a perfectionist in the studio, driving herself and her collaborators to the brink to capture the sound she heard in her head. She was also fiercely intelligent, outspoken, and had little patience for the games of the music industry. Her relationship with David Geffen, once her champion, began to sour. She felt he wasn't promoting her albums with enough passion, that he was more focused on his newer, more commercially successful acts like the Eagles and Jackson Browne. The simmering tension exploded in a moment of career suicide. During a tour in England, frustrated and feeling ignored, Judee went on stage and, in front of an audience, made a public homophobic remark about Geffen. In that single self-destructive moment, she severed the most important professional relationship of her life. Geffen was furious. When she returned to the States, her support from the label vanished. Asylum effectively dropped her. Her tour was canceled. Her access to the top-tier studios and producers was gone. The commercial failure of Heart Food, which sold even less than her debut, was the final nail in the coffin of her mainstream career. At the very height of her artistic powers, after creating two of the most critically acclaimed and unique albums of the decade, Judee Sill was cast out into the wilderness. The years that followed were a slow, heartbreaking descent. Judee was not one to give up easily. She immediately began writing songs for a third album, which she planned to call Dreams Come True. The demos she recorded during this period, which were finally released decades later, show that her talent was in no way diminished. Songs like That's the Spirit and the achingly beautiful Things Are Looking Up are as brilliant as anything on her first two records. She was moving towards a simpler, more direct sound, but the emotional depth and melodic genius were still there. But without a label, the project languished. To make matters worse, a series of personal calamities struck. She was involved in multiple car accidents, which left her with a severe and chronic back injury. She was in constant, agonizing pain. Doctors prescribed powerful painkillers, and for an ex-addict, this was a treacherous path. The relief from physical pain soon bled into a desire for the emotional numbness she had once sought in heroin. She relapsed. Her life became a tragic echo of her past. She fell back into the world of hard drugs, this time with a desperation fueled by chronic pain, crushing disappointment, and a profound sense of isolation. The vibrant, defiant artist who had commanded stages and mesmerized David Geffen was fading away. She took on odd jobs to survive, including working as a cartoonist at an animation studio. A strange, sad parallel to the work of her abusive stepfather. Her friends from the Laurel Canyon days watched from a distance, many of them helpless as she spiraled. She became increasingly reclusive, her world shrinking to the confines of her apartment and her addiction. The bright promise of redemption had curdled into a private hell. On November 23, 1979, Judee Sill was found dead in her North Hollywood apartment. The official cause of death was acute cocaine and codeine intoxication. It was an overdose. She was just 35 years old. There were no major headlines, no grand tributes in the music press. Her death was a quiet, lonely event, a barely noticed postscript to a career that had flamed out years earlier. The lost angel had finally fallen, and hardly anyone seemed to notice. For almost 20 years, that's where the story of Judee Sill ended. Her two albums went out of print, becoming mythical artifacts traded among hardcore collectors. She was a secret, a musician's musician, her name whispered by artists like Sean Colvin and Liz Phair, who recognized her overlooked genius. But secrets this powerful can't stay buried forever. In the early 2000s, a new generation began to rediscover her. Musician and producer Jim O'Rourke was instrumental in championing her work, helping to get her albums reissued on CD with bonus tracks, including the demos for her Lost Third album. Suddenly, Judee Sill and Heart Food were available to anyone with an internet connection. Then came the 2022 documentary Lost Angel, The Genius of Judee Sill. Through archival footage and interviews with those who knew her and those who were inspired by her, the film finally gave her story the platform it deserved. It painted a complex portrait of a woman who was both a saint and a sinner, a divinely inspired artist, and a deeply troubled human being. It didn't shy away from her darkness, but it celebrated her light with a fierce passion. The rediscovery of Judee Sill is more than just a musical curiosity. It's part of a larger cultural reevaluation of brilliant women who were dismissed, misunderstood, or destroyed by the very industries they sought to conquer. Her story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What is the cost of genius, especially when it resides in a person who doesn't play by the rules? How many other lost angels are out there, their art silenced by commercial pressures or personal demons? Judee's influence now is more potent than ever. You can hear echoes of her intricate arrangements and emotional honesty in the music of artists like Fleet Foxes, Wise Blood, and Big Thief. She has become a patron saint for a certain kind of artist, the one who dares to be complex, who blends the sacred and the profane, who writes from the deepest, most vulnerable parts of their soul. In 2020, 41 years after her death, the New York Times published her obituary as part of their Overlooked No More series. It was a formal mainstream acknowledgement of a significance that had been obvious to a devoted few for decades. It was a final poignant piece of justice. The life of Judee Sill is not a simple story with a neat moral. It's a messy, painful, and profoundly human tragedy. It's a story of how childhood trauma can echo through a lifetime, how addiction can shadow even the most brilliant light, and how the world can often fail to recognize a miracle when it's standing right in front of it. But it's also a story of breathtaking resilience. It's about the woman who taught herself to write sublime music in a reform school chapel, the woman who kicked heroin in a jail cell and walked into the heart of the music industry, the woman who, for a few brilliant, fleeting years, channeled her immense pain into 2 albums of almost unbearable beauty. Her life was short, and much of it was filled with suffering, but her art is eternal. Judee Sill wanted to create music that would connect her and us to something divine. She wanted to find redemption. In the end, perhaps her true redemption is this, that decades after her lonely death, her voice is finding its way to new listeners. Her secrets are being shared, and her music is finally offering the solace and transcendence she so desperately sought for herself. She is the lost angel, finally found. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.